The notification from the social network, Facebook, sounded at 2:47 in the morning. However, I was not asleep anyway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and wondered why my fiancée Lydia was still not home. Her bachelorette party should have ended several hours ago. I reached for my phone, expecting to see some drunken message or a blurry selfie in the company of her friends. Instead, I stumbled upon a photo that sent an icy chill down my spine. On the screen was Lydia, the woman with whom I had been building a relationship for 8 years. She was sitting on the lap of some man in the bar, Murphy's, located in the city center. Her arms were wrapped around his neck, and her face was flushed from the alcohol she had drunk, and something else that I dared not define. The stranger's face was partially turned away, but what I saw was enough for me. An expensive shirt, an arrogant smile, the type of person who considers himself the master of any room he enters. The caption to the photo read, "Last night of freedom. Thank you, girls, for the wildest bachelorette party of my life. No regrets, the last night alone." My palms were shaking as I scrolled through the comments. Her girlfriends were laughing their heads off, leaving flame emojis and encouraging remarks. Sienna, the maid of honor, wrote, "Whatever happens at the bachelorette party stays there." Oops. I did not take my eyes off that frame for 10 minutes, thoughts swarming in my head. 8 years together. For 8 years we were building a shared life, planning the future, talking about children, a mortgage, and growing old together. And this is how she decided to celebrate our upcoming marriage. Without a second thought, I saved the image and published it on my page with a brief comment. First night of freedom. In addition, I changed my relationship status to single and tagged all the significant people, including her father, Richard Hartwell, the most stuffy insurance company executive in all of Portland, Maine. Then I waited. The response was immediate and was like an explosion. The smartphone began vibrating from endless notifications and messages. Friends, relatives, colleagues, everyone wanted to speak up. Some expressed support, some were in shock, but most were simply thirsting for the drama. At 3:15 in the morning, I heard the sound of Lydia's car pulling up. She burst into the house like a natural disaster, her face contorted with rage. She was still wearing that same short black dress from the party, but her makeup was smeared. At that moment, she did not resemble in the slightest that composed insurance company employee I had once fallen in love with. "What the hell is wrong with you, Eli?" she screamed, waving her device. "Have you completely lost your mind?" I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, watching the social media fire that I myself had started. Our small town of Millbrook loved gossip, and I had just provided them with the main sensation of the year. What's wrong with me? I slowly stood up. At 38 years old, I had trained myself to control my emotions thanks to long service in the Army and running my own repair business. But today, that self-control was hanging by a thread. "I wasn't the one hugging strangers at my bachelorette party," I retorted. Lydia threw her purse onto the countertop. "It was just a joke. God, you are so insecure. It was harmless fun." Harmless? I brought the photo up on the big screen. "Does this seem normal to you?" Lydia glanced at the picture, and her face briefly went pale. But then her former bravado returned. "You don't trust me after 8 years? That says more about you than it does about me." "Who is he?" I asked directly. "No one, just some random guy at the bar. Sienna dared me to take that picture on a bet. He means nothing." However, her tone gave away her lie. The way her eyes darted and her fingers twitched was familiar to me. In my life, I had seen many liars and knew how to recognize the signs of deception. Then the phone rang. On the display appeared the name Richard Hartwell. "Answer it," Lydia hissed. I put it on speaker. "Hello, Richard." Her father's voice was colder than ice. "Elliot Griffin, what in the name of all that is holy is going on? Half the city is calling me about some nonsense on the internet. Ask your daughter. Let her explain everything," I replied. Lydia snatched the phone. "Dad, it's nothing. Eli is having some kind of breakdown. The photo was just a stupid joke. A joke that has already been shared 300 times, I interjected. "The local news page just published this post." Lydia's face changed. I refreshed the browser. Channel 8 News reported, "Local groom cancels wedding due to viral bachelorette party photo." "Congratulations, sweetheart. You're famous." "This is insane," she wailed. "You are destroying everything over a triviality." I laughed, but there was no joy in that laugh. Was it me who decided to rub against a stranger 3 days before our wedding? Richard's voice on the speaker came out sharply. Enough, both of you. Lydia, come home immediately. We will discuss the situation like adults. After she left, I remained in the kitchen, watching how the story spread across the network. Comments were coming from former classmates and army buddies. Even my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Carlin, had somehow found the post and left a series of shocked emoticons. When the wave of adrenaline subsided, an uneasy feeling settled in my soul. Lydia's behavior was too defensive, and the man in the photo seemed vaguely familiar to me, even though his face was hidden. I firmly decided to find out his identity. The next morning brought a flurry of calls, messages, and uninvited guests. Mrs. Carlin knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, bringing a casserole and displaying obvious curiosity. "What a shame, dear," she said, walking uninvited into the house. I must admit, I always had my doubts about that one. Too ambitious, if you ask me. And all those late nights at the office. Late nights? I asked. Well, yes. Supposedly working until late, but between you and me, I saw her car leave at 5:30 in the evening and come back only at 9 or 10. A strange way to work overtime, don't you think? I filed this information away and called my best friend Mike, who ran a bar downtown. If anyone knew all the town gossip, it was him. "Buddy, you just blew up the internet," Mike said, picking up the phone. "Half the town is talking about nothing else, and the other half is churning out memes. I need a favor. Can you meet for lunch?" We met at his place during the quiet afternoon hour. Mike poured me a beer and pushed over a plate of snacks. "So what's the real story?" he asked. I showed him the photo again. "Look at this guy, carefully." Mike peered at the screen and his eyebrows went up. "Whoa, is that Troy Barron? Who is that?" "The regional manager at Hartwell's company, Richard's golden boy. Drives a BMW and thinks he's a gift from heaven to all women. He comes in here sometimes with clients." Mike paused. "Eli, if Lydia is having an affair with Troy Barron, then this isn't just a fling. This guy is her boss's boss." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The late returns, the aggressive defensiveness, the panic in her eyes that night. This wasn't about one mistake at a party. "I need to know the truth," I said. "I'll help," Mike grinned. "But first, know this. Your social media stunt really hit Troy's reputation. They say Richard called him in this morning. The whole company is talking about it." That same evening, I parked across from the office building where Lydia worked. At 5:30, just as Mrs. Carlin had mentioned, she came out to her car. But instead of driving to her parents' house, she headed toward the city center. I followed her at a respectful distance, feeling my heart pound. She drove to the Riverside apartment complex, an upscale building on the waterfront. I watched her enter Building C with the air of someone who had done it hundreds of times. 20 minutes later, she came out again in the company of a tall man in an expensive suit. Even from a distance, I recognized him. It was Troy Barron. They got into his BMW and drove out of sight. I sat in my truck for about an hour, processing what I had seen. This was not a coincidence. This was a full-blown affair. Upon returning home, I called an old army buddy, Darius, who now ran a private investigation agency in Portland. "I need your help," I told him. "What exactly needs to be done?" "What you're good at, gathering data, surveillance, and maybe an unconventional approach to solving the problem." Darius chuckled. "Sounds like someone's in trouble. What's the situation?" I laid out all the facts, the photo, my investigation, the information about Troy. "Do you want to find out how far it has gone?" "I want to know absolutely everything. How long it has been going on, what their plans are, every little detail." "Give me 48 hours, he replied. The new morning brought more news. Sienna, the maid of honor, came to me herself. She looked deeply distressed. "We need to talk," she said. I led her in, noticing that she was carefully avoiding eye contact. "Listen, Eli, I feel terribly awkward about all of this. The whole photo thing went way too far." "Really? Or did it just bring to the surface what was already happening?" She nervously twisted the strap of her purse. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Troy Barron. How long has Lydia been seeing him?" Sienna covered her face with her hands. "I can't. I promised to stay quiet." "Sienna, I saw them together yesterday. I know about the apartment. The only question is whether you will help me figure out the situation or continue to cover up her lies." She burst into tears, mascara streaming down her cheeks. 6 months, she whispered through her sobs. It started 6 months ago at a corporate retreat. She claimed it was just physical, that she still loved you, but she needed some excitement. She made me swear I wouldn't tell anyone. And you thought that was okay? I hoped it would end soon. I thought she would just get it out of her system and still marry you. But then she started talking about possibly calling off the wedding, and I got scared. I thought if we threw her a wild bachelorette party, she would realize what she was giving up. So that party was some kind of test? She wanted to see if she could break it off with him. But when he showed up unexpectedly at the bar, Sienna shook her head. She literally lit up with joy. At that moment, I realized she really was in love with him. This news hit me with incredible force. What hurt was not just the fact of the betrayal itself, but the sheer scale of the deception, the months of preparing for our wedding while she was plotting her escape plan. That's not all, Sienna added quietly. Troy promised to leave his family. He says that as soon as he gets the vice president position, he'll have enough money to finally break it off for good. Lydia is convinced they will leave together. Wife? I stared at her. Yes, Troy has been married for 15 years, has 2 kids in private school. I looked Sienna straight in the eye. And Lydia knows about this? She thinks her case will be different, that he really loves her. After Sienna left, I sat in my garage among my tools, formulating a plan of action. For 8 years, I had been the reliable, stable guy, the one who fixed everything that broke, who kept quiet and didn't make waves. But Lydia and Troy had made one fatal mistake. They subjected me to public humiliation, thinking I would just swallow it and quietly disappear. They were about to learn that quiet people become extremely dangerous when pushed past their limit. Darius called me on Friday at 6 in the morning with the news. He said my fiancé hadn't been wasting any time. He had in his hands hotel receipts, credit card statements, and enough messages to fill a romance novel. I demanded he send me all the details. It turned out they had been meeting secretly twice a week for the past 6 months. The meeting place was always the same, the Riverside Inn. Troy preferred to pay in cash, but Lydia wasn't too concerned about secrecy. She used her bank card to pay for dinners, gifts, and even lingerie. She practically left a trail of breadcrumbs. I asked about the content of the messages. Darius said it got even more interesting there. Troy was feeding her promises about an imminent promotion to vice president and leaving his wife, a classic fairy tale. However, an examination of his finances showed a different picture. He was up to his eyeballs in debt, a huge mortgage, private school tuition for his kids, country club fees. He had no intention of leaving his wife anytime soon. Lydia, judging by her messages, was already planning to move in with him immediately after our wedding was officially called off. She was even looking at apartments. With every new detail, the betrayal cut deeper. While I was making plans for our shared future, she was preparing an escape plan. Darius added that Troy had a certain reputation at work. This was far from his first affair. Rumors had it that he had played this same game many times before, promising a woman he would leave his family, stringing her along for months, then vanishing without a trace as soon as the situation got too complicated. I asked Darius to forward everything he had gathered to my email immediately. He asked what my plans were. I replied that I intended to give them exactly what they deserved. That evening, I went to Allie's place to meet Mike. The bar was crowded, the usual Friday night bustle, but Mike had saved me a seat at the far end of the counter where we could talk without being overheard. He remarked that I looked awful and pushed a glass of beer toward me. I admitted I felt even worse, but that I already had a plan. I recounted everything Darius had dug up. Mike's face darkened with every word I spoke. He asked what my first step was. I decided to talk to Troy first, man to man. Mike doubted it, reminding me that guys like that probably have lawyers on speed dial. But I wasn't going to threaten him. I just wanted to make sure he fully understood the situation. At 9 in the evening, I drove to the Riverside complex and waited. As expected, Troy's BMW pulled into the parking lot. I watched him head toward Building C and got out of my truck. I called out his name. Troy Barron turned around, squinting in the dim glow of the streetlights. He asked who was calling him. I introduced myself, Eli Griffin. His face went instantly pale, although he tried to maintain his composure. He started to say something about the photo, but I interrupted him, saying the matter was far from just the picture. I stepped closer, noticing how he instinctively backed away toward his car. Despite the expensive clothes and pompous speeches, Troy was soft. He likely hadn't been in a real fight since high school. I calmly laid out the terms. He was to end any relationship with Lydia immediately, tonight, and never come near her again. Troy tried to say I had no right to tell him what to do, but I quickly shut him down. I told him I knew everything, about his wife, his kids, his mortgage debts, and the other women he had done the same thing with. And I added that Richard Hartwell valued his company's reputation above all else. Troy swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He accused me of making threats, but I corrected him. I was simply informing him. He tried to make excuses, saying Lydia was an adult and made her own decisions. I agreed, but added that I made my own decisions too. Taking out my phone, I showed him the screen. There was a draft email to Richard Hartwell with attached photos, hotel receipts, and screenshots of the messages. One click, and that message would go to his boss, his wife, and every gossip blog in town. The choice was his. Troy stared at the screen, then at me, muttering that I was bluffing. In response, I pressed send. The color completely drained from his face. He shouted an insult and lunged at me. But 8 years of military training and 15 years of hard physical labor had made me much stronger than his gym membership. I sidestepped his clumsy swing, grabbed his wrist, and twisted his arm behind his back. I quietly advised him for the future. Before destroying someone else's life, you should make sure that person doesn't know how to fight back. I let him go and walked back to my truck, leaving him in the parking lot to ponder how quickly he'd need to update his resume. My phone started blowing up with calls before I even got home. First Lydia, then Richard, then unknown numbers. I ignored them all. The next morning, I discovered that my story had gone viral again. Someone had filmed our altercation with Troy and posted it online. The comments were merciless, and most people took my side. The local handyman taught the cheating boss a lesson. Troy Barron got what he deserved. At 10 in the morning, Lydia appeared on my doorstep. She looked like she hadn't slept all night, her usually immaculate appearance replaced by dishevelment and despair. As soon as I opened the door, she started screaming that I had destroyed everything. I smirked in response. Troy had lost his job. Richard fired him that same morning. And it was only fair. Lydia demanded to know how I could be so cruel, since they supposedly loved each other. I laughed in her face. To Troy, she was just another game, like all the women before her. She tried to deny it, but I suggested she ask him about Jennifer Morrison or Sarah Chen, former employees who also thought they were special. Her face contorted. She accused me of lying, but I simply asked when she had last heard from Troy. It turned out he hadn't been in touch since the previous day. She frantically scrolled through messages on her phone, and her expression changed as she realized the truth. Troy had gone silent. She tried to convince herself that he was just thinking through his next steps, but the certainty in her voice was gone. I suggested he was more likely thinking about how to explain things to his wife and not lose half his assets in a divorce. Lydia declared that I didn't understand their feelings. On the contrary, I understood all too well. 6 months in cheap hotels and endless lies. And now, it was over. She looked at me for a long time, and I saw the moment when it dawned on her. I was right. Troy wasn't going to rescue her, wasn't going to leave his wife, and wasn't even answering her calls. She whispered that she hated me. I replied that it was fine, but she would hate herself even more when she realized what she had lost. After she left, I called Mike. He asked what it felt like to be the most famous person in Millbrook. I replied that this was only the beginning. The following week brought a cascade of consequences that rippled through our small town like rings of water from a thrown stone. Troy Barron had completely vanished from sight. Rumors had it that his wife had kicked him out, and he was living in a motel, looking for work in another state. Lydia had returned to her father's house, who was so depressed by the scandal that he barely went outside. However, my former friends reacted differently. It all started with Dave and Jennifer Morrison. Yes, that same Jennifer whom Troy had seduced and dumped 2 years ago. They had been part of our circle. We used to barbecue together and have game nights. The kind of friends you plan to know for life. Dave called me on Thursday evening. His voice was cold. He said we needed to talk about what I had done to Troy and Lydia. I was surprised by his tone. He accused me of destroying 2 lives over some stupid photo. I paused for a moment, trying to process what I had heard. I reminded him that Troy had slept with my fiancée, and that he had done the same thing to his own wife 2 years ago. Dave replied that it was different. He and Jennifer had worked through their problems and become stronger. In his opinion, I should have just looked the other way, married Lydia, and pretended nothing had happened. He believed I should have handled the matter privately, like an adult, instead of creating a public circus. The conversation quickly reached an impasse. Dave called me vindictive and cruel, and I accused him of having selective memory regarding his wife's infidelity. A lot was said that shouldn't have been, and he wasn't the only one. Over the next few days, I heard from Tom and Susan Bradley, Mark and Carol Chen, and other couples from our circle. The message from all of them was the same. I had gone too far and become the villain of this story. It became clear that they had been discussing the situation among themselves, constructing a convenient version where I was the aggressor, and Lydia and Troy were the victims of my cunning revenge plot. The climax came on Saturday evening at Allie's Place bar. I was having a quiet drink with Mike when Dave, Tom Bradley, and Mark Chen walked in. They spotted me immediately and headed for our table. Dave greeted me loudly, for the whole bar to hear, as the new town celebrity. I asked him not to make a scene here, but he retorted that I hadn't been afraid to air my own life in public. Tom stepped closer and called me a bitter, pathetic little man who couldn't handle the fact that his woman had found someone better. The bar fell silent. All eyes were on us. Some people had already started filming on their phones. I slowly stood up and asked whom exactly he considered better. A married man who had lied to her about divorcing and was just using her. Mark interjected that at least Troy had treated her like a queen and asked when I had last bought her flowers, jewelry, or taken her somewhere nice. I replied that I had been saving money for our wedding, the same wedding she was planning to run away from. Dave shouted that I was just a boring, small-town handyman with no ambition, no taste, and no future. He declared that Lydia deserved better than spending her life fixing toilets. Those words stung deeply. These were people I had considered friends, who had sat at my table for years and celebrated holidays with me. Tom continued, claiming I was so insecure that I had chosen to destroy someone else's happiness because I couldn't satisfy my own woman. Mike tried to intervene and step between us, but Dave rudely told him to mind his own business, calling me a loser. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Weeks of humiliation, betrayal, and now even my friends siding with those who had hurt me. I spoke in an absolutely calm but icy voice. I said that what was truly pathetic was 3 grown men ganging up on one because they were too spineless to admit that their own wives had probably cheated on them too. Mark stepped forward, asking what I had said. I repeated that Jennifer had definitely slept with Troy, and that if I dug deeper, I would probably find dirt on the rest of them too. Dave drew back his arm to throw a punch, but his movement was too predictable. I ducked and landed a counterpunch to his solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping for air. Tom grabbed a beer bottle and came at me, but Mike knocked him down before he could swing. Mark tried to come from behind, but I spun around and hit him in the ribs with my elbow, sending him crashing into a nearby table. The fight was over in 30 seconds, but the damage was irreparable. And I wasn't talking just about physical injuries. Dave would be in pain for a whole week, and a nasty bruise would bloom on Mark's ribs. But far worse was the social fallout, the final break of bonds that could never be repaired. "Get out of here," Mike told them, as they picked themselves up off the floor. "All of you, and don't come back." As they hobbled toward the exit, Dave turned to me. "This isn't over, Eli. We'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." "They already know," I replied. "They know I'm the kind of man who can stand up for himself." After they left, the bar gradually returned to normal, but I could feel the stares and hear the whispers. Some were clearly on my side, but others looked at me as if I were a ticking time bomb. "You okay?" Mike asked. "Couldn't be better," I lied. The fight had brought momentary satisfaction, but now I had to face reality. I had lost a fiancé, friends, and likely my reputation in this small town, where everyone knew everyone else's business. The smartest move would be to lay low, wait for the gossip to die down, or even think about moving away. But I was never considered particularly smart. Monday morning brought the reckoning for Saturday's brawl. My phone vibrated with endless notifications. Someone had filmed the whole thing and posted it online. The footage was grainy, and the audio was poor, but the video clearly showed me fighting 3 men and emerging victorious. The comments were divided. Some called me a hero, others a violent thug. Heated debates erupted in local Facebook groups about whether my reaction was justified or just another example of toxic masculinity out of control. But what really surprised me was a call from Darius. "You haven't been wasting time," he said. "News travels fast, faster than you can imagine. I have some interesting information about your former friends. For example, that they had been planning this for weeks, ever since the Troy story became public. They were meeting at Dave's house, coordinating their actions." "Coordinating how?" I asked. "Phone calls, social media posts, even emails. They were working to turn your entire social circle against you. The goal was to completely isolate you, make you a pariah, while they played the reasonable adults." I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would they do that? Because you made them look bad. By exposing Troy and Lydia, you also showed that all of them knew what was going on and kept quiet. Now they're trying to save their own skins by making you the villain. What else? Dave is in contact with Lydia. They're plotting something for this weekend, some kind of public provocation to make you look unstable. Where exactly? At the Autumn Festival in the town center. There will be lots of people and cameras. The perfect place to force you into doing something stupid. The Autumn Festival was the biggest annual event in Millbrook. The whole town and many visitors from surrounding areas would gather there. If Dave and his crew were planning an ambush, it would happen in front of hundreds of witnesses. "There's something else," Darius continued. "I dug into the finances and personal lives of your buddies, like you suggested. Want to know what I found? Lay it on me." Tom Bradley has been having an affair with his secretary for 8 months. Mark Chen has been embezzling money from his construction company to pay off gambling debts. And Dave Morrison has been buying pills from a dealer in Portland. And I'm not talking about light stuff. We're talking heavy drugs, powders. That kind of thing carries serious prison time. I leaned back in my chair, processing the information. My former friends weren't just hypocrites. They were criminals. Can you prove all this? Photos, financial records, text messages. These guys aren't as careful as they think they are. Send me everything. What are you planning? I'm going to give them exactly what they were planning for me. Public humiliation they won't be able to recover from. Saturday was gray and rainy, a typical October in Maine. The festival was set up on the town square. Food trucks, craft stalls, and a small stage for local bands. Despite the weather, hundreds of people showed up for the annual event. I arrived around noon, in jeans and a flannel shirt, looking like any ordinary local. But I hadn't come for the food or the entertainment. I had come for war. First, I spotted Dave, standing by the apple cider tent with Tom and Mark. They were scanning the crowd, clearly looking for me. Nearby, Lydia was talking to colleagues, occasionally glancing toward Dave. Everyone was there. Perfect. I walked toward the stage, where a country band was finishing their set. The festival organizer, Betty Walsh, was standing nearby with a tablet. "Betty, can I borrow the microphone for a minute?" I asked. "Of course, dear. Want to make an announcement?" Something like that. I stepped onto the stage as the musicians were packing up their instruments. The microphone was live, and when I tapped it, the sound echoed across the square. "May I have your attention, please?" The crowd slowly turned toward the stage. I saw Dave and his friends start pushing through the people, realizing what was happening but powerless to stop it. For those who don't know me, I'm Eli Griffin. I've lived in this town my whole life, and I've always believed in treating people with honesty and respect. Silence fell over the square, the only sound the drumming of rain on the tents. Recently, some individuals have been spreading rumors about me, calling me unstable, violent, and a bad friend. So I decided to take this opportunity to set the record straight. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the sound system. This is a recording of Dave Morrison negotiating a purchase of pills in Portland last month. The sound was crystal clear. Dave's voice discussed prices, quantities, and regular deliveries. A murmur rippled through the crowd. People recognized his voice. Dave's face went pale. He tried to rush the stage, but too many people were in his way. The next recording is Tom Bradley, discussing on the phone with his secretary their affair and how to hide it from his wife. Tom's voice filled the square. He talked about hotels, lies, and laughed about how unsuspecting his wife was. I saw Susan Bradley in the crowd, her face a mask of shock and rage. And finally Mark Chen, discussing how he is stealing money from his construction company to pay off his casino debts. Mark's voice was the final nail in the coffin. He talked about embezzlement as casually as if it were a minor accounting error. The crowd buzzed. People were taking out their phones to record what was happening. Others were calling friends. "These are the people who called me unstable," I said into the microphone. "These are the people who said I went too far when I exposed my fiancé's infidelity. Now you decide who the real villain is in this story." I turned off my phone and stepped down from the stage. Dave, Tom, and Mark finally fought their way through to me, their faces contorted with rage and panic. "You bastard!" Dave roared, lunging at me. But I was ready. I sidestepped his lunge, and his own momentum carried him straight into the stage platform. He hit hard and went down. Next was Tom, swinging wildly. I caught his wrist, and using his own force, flipped him over my hip. He landed hard on the wet grass and didn't get up. Mark was smarter. He pulled out a knife. The crowd screamed and scattered as Mark advanced on me, the blade glinting in the gray afternoon light. But 20 years of military and civilian training had taught me how to deal with armed opponents. I grabbed a nearby folding chair and blocked the first strike with it. The knife got stuck in the metal frame. While Mark was trying to pull it out, I swung the chair and struck him in the temple. He collapsed like a sack of potatoes. The entire fight lasted barely 90 seconds, but it felt like hours to me. I stood in the middle of the town square, surrounded by my defeated enemies, hundreds of people staring at me in stunned silence. Then came the applause. First one person, then the clapping spread through the crowd like wildfire. People were cheering, whistling, taking photos and videos. Someone shouted, "That's how you teach bullies a lesson." The crowd roared its approval. I looked around and saw Lydia by the cider tent. She was pale with shock. Our eyes met, and I saw something in her gaze that I hadn't noticed before. Fear. She was finally beginning to understand exactly what she had done by betraying me. But I wasn't finished yet. I walked toward her, and the crowd parted before me like the Red Sea before Moses. "Hello, Lydia." "Eli, please. I have something for you." I pulled out an envelope and handed it to her. With trembling hands, she pulled out a stack of photos and documents. "These are pictures of Troy with his wife and kids at Disneyland last weekend," I said, loud enough for everyone around to hear. "And this is the lease agreement for their new house in Florida. Turns out he didn't lose his job at all. He was transferred, and he took his family with him." Lydia stared at the photos, her face contorting as the truth sank in. Troy hadn't been ruined by our scandal. He had used it as an excuse to disappear and start fresh somewhere else, just as he had done before. "He never loved you," I said quietly. "You were just another game to him." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her cheeks. "How did you know?" "I hired a private investigator. Turns out Troy had pulled this same scheme in 3 different cities. He always picks ambitious women, promises to leave his wife, and vanishes when things get complicated." The crowd hung on every word. Phones recorded every second. Lydia's humiliation was now as public as my own had once been. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you did it to me first. The only difference is that everything I've said is the truth." I turned to the crowd one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to remember this day. Remember what happens when you try to destroy an innocent person to hide your own crimes. Remember what happens when kindness is mistaken for weakness." I walked through the crowd toward my truck. People stepped aside, clearing the path. Behind me, I heard the approaching wail of sirens. Someone had finally called the police because of the fight. But I wasn't worried. I had video of Mark pulling a knife, witnesses who saw Dave and Tom attack first, and a whole town square full of people who had just watched 3 criminals and a cheating ex-fiancé get exposed. As I drove away from the festival, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in many months, I was smiling. The quiet handyman was gone. In his place was something harder, someone who cannot be broken, betrayed, or humiliated, someone who knows how to fight back and win.